What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video, and we are taking a journey through the popular decks of the modern format as we are in the middle of the regional championship season. We actually just had the first set of regional championships, the biggest one being held in Prague just this past weekend, with Temur Breach, unfortunately for a lot of us, taking down the tournament, absolutely decimating every Boros Energy player, and the actual runner-up of the event as well. It was a very close 3-game set, but Eldrazi Ramp unfortunately coming up short against the Breach deck. So we're going to be taking a look at it this week. I think I kind of owe it to the deck because I felt pretty underwhelmed by it, and just after watching it over the weekend and actually getting my hands on it and playing it myself, this deck is a lot of fun, and it does feel very powerful, especially with some of the card choices that they decide to make to kind of combat what the Breach decks and what the Boros Energy decks are doing in the format. But of course, before we get too deep into the deck and we talk about what Eldrazi Ramp is trying to accomplish and some of the broken things that it actually gets to do, if you're not subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me where we post a lot about the modern and standard formats, as well as some other longer form videos, of course our own personal coverage of the regional championship series, the Pro Tour, and of course the World Championships, breaking down anything and everything competitive Magic, please consider subscribing and ring that notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. It's a very easy way to support me and my content. Also, of course, consider leaving a like on the video, and of course comment down below how you feel about this Eldrazi Ramp deck. Again, I was pretty underwhelmed by it, just kind of looking at it. I'm like, it just seems like any other like typical ramp deck. You know, Tron has been something specifically in my mind that has been rather underwhelming to me. And I think always ends up doing better than what is kind of put out in front of us. But this Eldrazi Ramp deck in particular, obviously not playing anything like Tron, but just having that same kind of vibe, and I was totally wrong, and I'm willing to kind of go back on that. Some other things too, if you go down the description below, you can join my Discord server with the link down in the description below. You can also go follow me on Twitch over at twitch.tv/cardaddy23. I have it linked down there, so you can go and follow and check us out when we go live. Lastly, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. It is a subscription service where you can go and rent decks such as this. I'll even have the deck list in the description down below if you decide that you want to try out this Eldrazi Ramp deck. And then you can go over to Manatraders, sign up over there using my code to get 5% off your monthly subscription, so you can go play in, have various different decks and be able to exchange different decks and figure out what you want to be playing in these formats, even participating in their free tournament series that goes on at least once a month that you can qualify for their invitational at the end of the year. Thank you for sponsoring the channel, Manatraders. I really do appreciate it. Of course, remember to use my code when signing up over at Manatraders. And with that said, let's go ahead and check out this Eldrazi Ramp deck, because it uses one of the more broken soul lands that was printed in Modern Horizons, and probably one with the least amount of drawback to it, and that is this card, Ugin's Labyrinth. So Ugin's Labyrinth is a land that when it comes into play, you may exile a card with mana value 7 or greater, a colorless card with mana value 7 or greater from your hand. It taps to add a colorless mana, but if there's a card exiled with Ugin's Labyrinth, it adds 2 colorless mana instead, and then you can tap and return the exiled card to its owner's hand. Typically, the best way of like balancing cards like this, and what we've seen for something like Chromox, which asks you to imprint a card onto it, and then you can tap it to add a color of mana of the card that's imprinted. Ugin's Labyrinth just cares about a colorless card with mana value 7 or greater going underneath this, so you can tap it for 2 mana, no conditions, no strings attached to it. You just have to exile a card. And the fact that you can also get that card back with Ugin's Labyrinth, you know, when you don't necessarily need the mana anymore, is pretty neat. It's kind of a way that you can cheese this card in a way where you can just play it early and play some of your smaller ramp creatures early on, and then once you get enough lands in play, you can just get the card back and then have something else to kind of cast later. It does make it vulnerable to like land destruction, you know, if you're seeing stuff like Ghost Quarter, which we're seeing from some of these other Eldrazi Ramp decks, and of course Sowing Mycospawns that we see from some of the other decks as well. You can end up just losing that card forever, so there is a little bit of a cost there, but really the fact that you can just get this card back at any time as long as your land isn't destroyed, then you're just able to get it back and have some gas for later. So this is kind of what the deck's built around. We want to get to 2 mana as early as possible, and this is like the best way of doing it is playing an Ugin's Labyrinth, and then we exile our plethora of 7-cost colorless spells here. We have Devourer of Destiny, Null Drifter, World Breaker, which is technically colorless even though it costs a green mana because of the Devoid mechanic, and of course Emrakul, the Promised End. All these cards are absolute bangers. The only creature that can't, or really the only colorless spell that we can't put underneath of it, is Sowing Mycospawn, but thanks to Ugin's Labyrinth giving us 2 colorless mana on our turn, it allows us to set up some scenarios where we can cast a Sowing Mycospawn on turn 2. One of these ways that we can do this is with an Ugin's Labyrinth, exiling a card, and then playing one of Talisman of Impulse or Talisman of Curiosity. These tap for a colorless mana, or they can tap for a green or a blue, or a green or a red, and they deal 1 damage to us. This allows us to have 3 mana, and then any second land is going to allow us to cast Sowing Mycospawn to then go search our library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. It puts it into play untapped, so you can go and get another Ugin's Labyrinth. You can then imprint a card underneath of it and get access to 2 colorless mana. Well, it's not really going to do too much for us. It does allow you to then cast another Talisman, or if you have any additional mana kind of left around, you're going to be able to do Kozilek's Command, which does share some interesting properties and some capabilities with another soul land in our deck in Eldrazi Temple. So this taps for colorless mana, and then you can spend tap it for 2 colorless mana, but it comes with the caveat of only being able to cast colorless Eldrazi spells or activate the abilities of colorless Eldrazi. So this allows us to, again, another way that we can cast a Sowing Mycospawn on turn 2 is by using some of our other ramp like Utopia Sprawl here, where we can enchant a forest, choose a color, and it taps for, you know, the mana plus the additional mana that Utopia Sprawl offers to us, meaning that this is also a way that with like Eldrazi Temple or even Ugin's Labyrinth, after our turn 1 Utopia Sprawl, we can cast a Sowing Mycospawn and go and search for a land and set up our other Mycospawns. So definitely a lot of interesting stuff going on here. This is a deck that you're kind of focused pretty early on trying to ramp. Again, you have like this Utopia Sprawl plan, you have Labyrinth into these Talismans to really set up your 4-drops and really kind of get the ball rolling. Ideally enough, you end up playing a Mycospawn. On turn 2, you end up going and getting an Eldrazi Temple. Now, any land that you play is going to get you up to 7 mana. So, firstly, we have Devourer of Destiny here. This is a card that can help you get some consistency, where you can reveal it if it's in your opening hand. And at the beginning of your first upkeep, you look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may put one of those cards on top of your library, and then you exile the rest. And then when you cast a spell, you can exile target permanent that's 1 or more colors. So this is just something that you can go and try to dig a little bit for an Ugin's Labyrinth if there isn't one in your opening hand. And because it is 7 colorless mana, it also goes underneath Ugin's Labyrinth as well. So just kind of like a pair we see here. I played one list like this on stream that was only playing 2 Devourer of Destinies. I've seen some playing 4. This one opted for 3. I'm not sure exactly what the right number of this card is, but this definitely is a card that can kind of help you solve some of the consistency issues where you just have this in your hand. It's sort of kind of a payoff. It's a thing that goes underneath Ugin's Labyrinth. And again, it can help you dig for either Ugin's Labyrinth or maybe another threat if you end up having a pretty land-heavy hand or a pretty ramp-heavy hand as well. Null Drifter is a pretty interesting one. So it's a 7-mana 4/4 that when you cast the spell, you draw 2 cards. It has Flying, Annihilator 1, and you can evoke it for 2 in a blue. The crazy thing about Evoke is that even though you pay, say, 2 in a blue for this specific card, the card still has a converted mana cost of 7. So it works pretty well with some cards that we're going to actually point out here, with Kozilek's Return as a card that is just kind of a hedge against a lot of the Boros energy running around in the format. So for 2 in a red, it deals 2 damage to each creature at instant speed. And whenever you cast an Eldrazi creature spell with converted mana cost 7 or greater, you may exile it from your graveyard. If you do, it deals 5 damage to each creature. So this is a way that you can interact with some of the Boros energy decks early, and then some of the other creature decks that may be going a little bit bigger, maybe something like the Yawgmoth decks or even the, the black-white mid-range decks here, you can end up playing a Kozilek's Return to kind of wipe away their board, and then have an uncounterable way of just flashing back a Kozilek's Return by just simply evoking a Mulk Drifter to kind of get you there. Of course, you're not going to really have a problem just hard casting any of these spells either. This is just like a way that you can, pretty early on, if your opponent is able to rebuild very quickly, Kozilek's Return your opponent on one turn and then go into the next turn and just get to do it again and hopefully set them back far enough to where you are then able to get a little bit of card advantage going by drawing cards from this Null Drifter and eventually setting up ways to just further ramp and playing a lot of your big spells to kind of get some advantage. We have 2 World Breaker here. Whenever you cast a spell, exile target artifact, enchantment, or land. Pretty good in the mirror. Has sneaky reach in there, and of course is a recurring threat because you can pay 2 and a colorless mana. Sacrificing a land, return it to your hand from your graveyard, meaning that you just always seem to have a recursive threat that is going to be very big. It's going to be very hard. 7 toughness is really hard to beat from like a lot of these other decks that are just dealing increments of 5-6 damage. It's a lot of energy to pay to be able to deal with a creature that is just more than likely to be able to come back on the next turn. Emrakul, the Promised End, is a card that is absolutely insane in this deck. You are able to play it very quickly. There's been plenty of times where I've played this on like turn 4, with very little setup. But Emrakul, the Promised End, 13 for 13, costs 1 less for each card, or for each card type among cards in your graveyard. So if you have 5 card types, it ends up costing 8 mana, which is pretty easy to do when you have cards like Malevolent Rumble that kind of set you up by revealing 4 cards, putting a permanent into your hand, and then putting the rest in your graveyard, and then creating a spawn token, essentially making this cost 1 mana on top of potentially putting a bunch of card types into your graveyard. Kozilek's Command, as we referred to earlier, also when you have just a bunch of mana, you can make a bunch of spawn tokens, scry X and draw a card and do whatever else that you need to do with this. Really making the spawns is huge because then you can just dig for whatever other spell, and then you can kind of combo it with playing like a big Emrakul, the Promised End, into something like a Null Drifter to then draw more cards, or Devourer of Destiny, blow something up. Just a ton of different utility things that you can do with Kozilek's Command, and it technically puts 2 card types in the graveyard, since Kindred is also considered a card type alongside of Instant. So really cool there. But Emrakul, the Promised End, is, going back to this, it's going to cost less for each card type in your graveyard, and when you cast the spell, you gain control of an opponent during their next turn, and then after turn, they take an additional turn, and giving them an additional turn really doesn't mean anything when you absolutely make them have the worst possible turn that they could ever have. There's been plenty of games where I've played like Emrakul, the Promised End, and your opponent has like a board full of creatures, and they have a bunch of cards in hand, and all of a sudden they go down to 1 card, and it's literally the worst possible thing that they can have, and they have no board because they end up running their biggest creature into Emrakul, the Promised End, and like also shooting down their other creatures. Like I played a game against like a Jeskai player that played a Escape to Flage, and then I was able to attack Flage, pick off one of their own creatures, Emrakul eat Flage, recast the Flage from their graveyard, and then kill the Flage with like their last spell in hand, and then them not have enough mana to actually buy back the Flage from their graveyard and get it back into play. So I mean, just at that point, having no cards in hand, really nothing else that they could do outside of whatever they draw on their draw step is pretty daunting, especially when, again, you have a 13/13 flying trample protection from instants staring you in the face that is going to take chunks out of your life total, on top of, again, some of the chip damage you can get in by early Myco Spawns and even Devourer of Destinies kind of clearing the way. So this deck is pretty nuts. With Sowing Myco Spawn being able to get lands out of your deck just by casting it, you have things like Bojuka Bog that can go and disrupt your opponent's graveyard, or disrupt a player's graveyard, technically. We have Sanctum of Ugin here that you can end up playing this, and then it'll allow you to kind of search for any of your other threats. If you're missing an Emrakul, the Promised End, Worldbreaker, Null Drifter, whatever the case may be, you cast any one of those, you can use Sanctum to go and get you another one. We also have Hedge Maze here and Cavern of Souls to make your Eldrazi spells uncounterable. Hedge Maze just being one of the Surveil lands that you can play. More than likely, I mean, it's kind of something that you can just do for free off of Sowing Myco Spawn, because even if you're not getting an Eldrazi Soul land, if you just have another land to play after that, you're going to be able to kick a second Myco Spawn, exiling an opponent's land, and then making another Ugin's Labyrinth or Eldrazi Temple to kind of just keep the ramp going. Sideboard, you are playing Karn the Great Creator in this deck. 4 mana, you shut off your opponent's artifact abilities, so doing a lot of work against the Temur Breach decks, against the 4-color Breach decks, and against the people playing Belcher, because Belcher is a really good matchup, against the Boros Energy decks. So you do have Karn the Great Creator there to kind of help in those set of artifact matchups. You can turn non-creature artifacts into artifact creatures with power toughness equal to their mana value, and you can search your sideboard or a card in exile, or a face-up artifact that you control in exile, and you put that card in your hand. So we do get to play a Karn Wishboard, where we see things like Cityscape Leveler, Ensnaring Bridge, Torpor Orb, the Stonebrain, Soulless Jailer, Liquid Metal Coating, which works well with Karn's +1. You can just target your opponent's lands with Liquid Metal Coating, and Karn can turn those lands into creatures. They are 0/0, so they end up dying, essentially Stone Raining your opponent. Cursed Totems for the creature activations things, where people are playing the Ogmoth decks. This is just fine to have one of these in your sideboard. Haywire Might, Tormod's Crypt, and Engineer Explosives. We do have cards like Dismember, are pretty good against the Oculus decks. Kozilek's Return, at the 4th copy, because, Boros Energy is like the best deck in the format. And Consigner Memory kind of helps you out in some of the mirror matches and even against some of these other like colorless decks where, again, just for 1 blue mana, you're able to counter a thing. Replicating it as well makes it very hard for your opponent to actually counter and answer your Consigner Memory. You're just going to almost make sure that you're able to like counter whatever it is that they play and make them really sad. But yeah, that is the Eldrazi ramp deck for Modern. This deck is pretty sweet. There is some versions where I prefer Shifting Woodlands in the main deck, just because there's been plenty of times where you're low on clock and Shifting Woodlands just turning into an Emrakul the Promised End and just essentially being a like sorcery speed, creature, or a creature that dodges like a lot of the sorcery speed removal, especially since it does have protection from instants. You're only trying to dodge something like a Solitude from your opponent. So definitely seems like a card that's like worth including in here. Maybe over like a 4th forest, you just play 3 forests, but really aside from that, like this deck is pretty awesome. I like a lot of what is going on here. We've seen Writhing Chrysalis end up being kind of an inclusion for this Eldrazi ramp deck as well. So definitely interesting to see where this deck goes going forward. Again, I got 2nd place. It was the only I only had 1 copy in the top 8. We had 3 Boros Energy and 3 of the Breach decks into the top 8 of that event, and a Brood Scale deck as well, which we fully recapped in another video that we actually posted yesterday, so be sure to go check that out. But Eldrazi Ramp seems like it's in a pretty good position to be able to beat both of the top decks in the format, and might actually just be kind of the underdog, just because I think that the other 2 decks have a lot of consistency, and there's a reason why that they're the most played decks. But certainly with all the results that we had seen, I expect this deck stock to completely increase. And if you want to learn more about and some of the predictions that we made for the Modern format after that first big set of Modern tournaments, you can go ahead and check out the video I posted yesterday where we recapped Regional Championship Prague and kind of asked some questions, and hopefully are going to get some answers here in the near future as we gear up for the United States Regional Championship in Portland taking place in like about the next 2 to 3 weeks. So be on the lookout for that video, as we are going to be kind of covering the metagame like we did this time and going over conversion rates and talking about all that fun stuff. So be sure to check all that stuff out. But yeah, anyway, that's Eldrazi Ramp deck for Modern. Hope you all enjoyed it. Again, leave a like on the video, comment down below what you feel about this deck. Of course, check out all the links in the description down below. All is greatly appreciated. But that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next one.